Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, host and executive producer of Rip Red, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randal Baier. We're going to talk about some pretty interesting books that apply to this season. One of them is a book about George Bush by Gene Edward Smith.
Okay, a new biography?
Yeah, excuse me, and it's really good. Gene Edward Smith is a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto and has been a visiting scholar, professor at Columbia, Princeton, Georgetown, Marshall Universities. George Will calls him America's greatest living biographer. He's the author of Eisenhower and War and Peace, FDR. He's a winner of the 2008 Francis Parkland Prize of the Society of American Historians. It goes on and on, but he's really good.
Well, you know, I don't read enough biography. Occasionally when I read it, I tend to get interested, but I don't really know a lot about George Bush. He's so iconic in terms of, you know, my own personal politics, and so it's so easy to make into sort of a larger-than-life figure. I know nothing about his background, really, other than the negative sort of, you know, the political things that come up in the news and all that stuff.
Well, I thought since we're in the midst of the presidential campaign era, that this is a particularly appropriate book to read about the legacy of a president.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people don't know that he is being regarded as a war criminal. And that he has not left the country, because if he were to leave the country, he'd be served with, you know, a petition for his arrest.
And this is covered in this book?
Well, not exactly, but this is a pretty interesting book because it talks about his legacy and gets into it. The issue about his war criminal status is one that people are dancing around because it hasn't been consummated yet.
Yeah.
But I thought the issue of legacy is an interesting topic to reflect on when you vote for a man for president or a woman, you know. And this author, Gene Edward Smith, is really good, very thorough.
Meticulous.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know the full history of George W. about how he was a lackluster student with a fondness for alcohol, became a born-again Christian, turned his life around according to the propaganda. And also that he sees life as a struggle between good and evil, and that he was God's agent for...
Is that what he thought he was? After he was born again?
Yeah. In the fight against the evil of terrorism, other countries are either with us or against us.
It's really a part of his policy.
He had no misgivings about detaining terrorist suspects indefinitely at Guantanamo.
Which we still have as a legacy.
Yeah. He called himself the decider. Even though others have insisted that Vice President Dick Cheney made the key foreign policy decisions. But I found this book really fascinating because of looking at legacy from a president. One of the things that is a part of Bush's legacy is the educational legislation called No Child Left Behind, which is one of my concerns, because a lot of people don't know that the rationale in the legislation for this initiative was plagiarized from a report by the Council on Higher Education saying, don't do this. The name was plagiarized from a woman who had a foundation trying to help kids that were left behind.
Wow, so it's an ironic
Plus it was based
rip-off
on testing.
Yeah.
And testing is notoriously racist.
Which her foundation probably wasn't advocating,
Yeah.
I imagine.
But testing is notoriously racist and elitist way of winning out people from the process. We won't even talk about this whole thing with the war in Iraq. which I think was an attempt by George W. to revenge for his father.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people didn't know that the head of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, was an employee of the CIA
Mm-hmm. It's true.
under George H.
H.W. Bush. Yeah.
And that when he went to war, with Iraq, supposedly over the weapons of mass destruction, which was completely fallacious, it put the United States into a position of destabilizing the whole Mideast. And so now we've got, the remnants of that, including ISIS and all that stuff. And so the whole thing about what a president can do is just staggering, the whole thing. And this author was very meticulous at sorting through the background of George W. and the family. The Bush family now is a dynasty, of what was going on.
He gets to the bottom of the whole scandal of the of his time out of Vietnam, being in the Air National Guard, and
see, George W. has sort of been one of my side issue readings.
Mm-hmm.
Like the guy who later became Attorney General got him out of a pickle because he was essentially AWOL from reporting for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And it was drunk and on drugs, But, so there's all this stuff, and they call it the wilderness years as before, And then he says George W. made a virtue of necessity. I think he was more that he was opportunistic, so he would take advantage of whatever he could. But he was a privileged, because he was the oil rich.
Oh yeah, I mean a very well-to-do, privileged family. There's no doubt about that because of the money from both his father, but his grandfather, his grandparents. I mean, it's an oil-rich family, I guess one would say.
And then there's the role of Texas in all this, and how he was governor, and won in a landslide in 1998, defeating Morrow, 68 to 31%, became the first governor in Texas history to win 2 consecutive terms.
Mm-hmm.
Texas, to me, is this sort of wild, unlicensed place. But,
right, Governor Richards was kind of an aberration in a way. Well, I guess every biographer tries to get to, the core of their personality is the black and white aspect of good. You are either one or the other, good or evil.
no, but
Kind of the core that he uncovers here about George W.
what I like is the thoroughness of the research. Just absolutely superb.
Right.
Didn't make irresponsible statements, but he had the documents.
Had the documents to show what's going on.
And then it takes people who are kind of in the background, but not really prime players, like Donald Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and all that, and does the same thing with them, details them through.
Well, they should be part of the criminal procedures as well, I would think.
Yeah.
If there's going to be any kind of
James Baker is another one.
Mm-hmm. Work of political, I guess you'd call it a network dynasty of people.
He says, for the great German philosopher George Hegel, ideas determined reality, and so it was for the Bush White House. Karl Rove's statement in the epigraph epitomized the view of George W. Bush and his immediate associates. Rove's comments were made in an interview with a journalist in which he criticized the reality-based community, those who believe that solutions to the world's problems emerge from the judicious study of discernible reality. Rove said, that's not the way the world really works anymore.
It's the idea. We
We are
enough.
history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do.
Oh man, oh man.
Now,
But
that isn't arrogance.
Well, that's the spin doctor, because he takes terminology and it's used to define one thing and turns it completely on its head. For instance, the concept of no child left behind, which actually was ways to leave many children behind in reality.
Well, it was a way to rationalize the reassignment of resources.
Mm-hmm.
To the elite, or
To
to
the- yeah,
the
or
powers,
to the
to
1%.
benefit the power structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I found this is a really rich read, and it's worthwhile, going through this in this chapter on the March of the Hegelians. Much of the Bush presidency, I was going, oh my God, you can't be that stupid, and it was,
And then there's
But
a
weren't
chap-
we complicit? I mean, we were complicit. We had an opportunity, Congress had an opportunity, or, our elected representatives had an opportunity to put a stop to it, and did not really put a stop to it. I'm thinking in terms of the,
Well, I think
Iraq
in
War.
retrospect,
it's going to mark the point where the empire started the downward slide.
Mm.
It's
Hubris,
that-
really.
Yeah, just,
Yeah.
let it go. Let's just be us, And there's a chapter, Sleep at the Switch. Oh my God. I mean, in a way, it's really sad to go back and look at all this, and realize about 911 and what it really was, and has continued to be. There was that episode where 911 was happening, and he was reading the story to students at an elementary school,
Mm-hmm.
and they came in trying to tell him that it was on. He waved them off, didn't want to be disturbed in his moment. Toppling the Taliban. There was that illusion that all you had to do was push some buttons and the Taliban would just fall over.
it's a little different in the mountains.
but by going to war with Iran, it really destabilized the whole Mideast,
Yeah.
the way it was done.
I mean, there were people saying that, and it also is an element apart from the retribution or whatever, I guess the necessary comeback against Bin Laden and the 9/11 tragedy. But there was an element of total bullying that the United States engaged in when they decided that Saddam Hussein, who hated Bin Laden, who did not want Bin Laden in his territory, decided that Iraq was going to threaten us with ICBMs or something. I mean, just really,
Weapons of mass destruction.
we just bit into the whole cookie there. It was.
Here's an interesting statement.
But the bullying was what I
George
got
W.
out of it.
Bush is regarded by many of his classmates at Harvard Business School as dynamically ignorant.
Hmm.
He was energetic, but ill-informed, untutored, and unread.
Mhm.
And he flaunted it. That really captures the stupidity of it all.
Mm.
And then his 2002 State of the Union address, and the phrase "axis of evil," as this author pointed, reeked of arrogance and obtuseness.
I wonder who gave him that phrase. Axis of evil. I wonder if that's a Rovian phrase.
The French Foreign Minister, Hubert Vedin, called the speech simplistic. That's a kind criticism.
That's kind, saying it kindly.
Bush, he said, had reduced all the world's problems to the struggle against terror. And from that rationale, then they got into the whole thing about torture
Mhm.
and terrorist attacks in Guantanamo Bay, which is still around. And we can't get ourselves out of it, which is the fate of most empires. And the attempt to protect themselves, they get caught up in these conundrums that they can't get out of.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, the barbarians are at the gates. What are you going to do?
Well, in some cases we're the barbarians. Maybe in many cases.
And then waging aggressive war, the prelude. Bush remained focused on Iraq. That became his cause. See that too.
Yeah, I think that might be something that is the essence of not being nuanced in one's diplomacy. I mean, he was stuck on an idea, and I totally agree with you about it being a kind of revenge, some kind of thing, because, you know, if not only losing the oil, but spoiling his father's, you know, presidency by essentially getting even, trying to get even.
And Bush portrayed Saddam Hussein as the evil man who hated America.
I mean, how many other?
He said, we not only know he's got chemical weapons, but incredibly enough, he's used chemical weapons. He's used them on his own people. This is a man who has got terrorist connections, would like nothing more than to provide the arsenal and training ground for those cold-blooded killers, and they could attack us, and he would leave no fingerprints behind. He's a threat.
He was not a threat. Not in that sense. He had the oil. They wanted it.
Well, that's another thing, the oil politics and all of this.
I mean, Hussein was not, you know, a good guy, but why, well, we'll be wasting our words. Going back 16 years now.
But what our point is what happened then has influenced what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
Because of what
His invasion of Iraq has so destabilized the Mideast that they have ISIS, you know. And now, I don't think anybody knows what's really going on because it's so unstabilized. And there's constant attacks on people, terrorist attacks, you know, where things going on and on and on.
And then there was
No, that's the thing. I think the point is about that is that they didn't seem to have any regard for that kind of legacy. They didn't think about. I'm sure it must have been some people telling them, "Don't do this." Well, of course, the whole flap about the Wilsons, so the people that came up and spoke out and said that they knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction, that there was evidence to say that those things that they were seeing were not at all connected to weapons of mass destruction, and they certainly weren't nuclear.
And I remember there was something about Colin Powell, that was about the weapons of mass destruction.
He was convinced that there were things
He
that
lied.
he was lied to.
He absolutely lied.
Maybe he was
knew
lied
that.
to, or he knew about
He
him
knew,
not.
but he lied.
No, he should regret
And
that.
that's what happens. That's what happens when good people get tangled up with evil people like that.
Yeah. He was, buddy with the Bushes.
I got a chapter, Rummy walks the plank, Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld was just something else. I mean, just,
But the scary thing about Rumsfeld was that he was very, very smart. I think he was probably smarter than all of them, but at the same time, immoral.
there's a chapter here, Quagmire of the Vanity.
Quagmire of the Vanities.
Yeah,
Quagmire of the Vanities.
Yeah. No.
So So it seems like Gene Edward Smith has an opinion, not a favorable opinion about Bush and Bush's legacy, even though it's meticulously researched.
Well,
From what you're
yeah,
picking up.
I just enjoyed how thorough he was.
Yeah, he's showing the facts.
He wasn't doing a
It says,
superficial,
right.
you know, off the top kind of thing.
If you're gonna have evidence of, wrongdoing, let's prove it. And it seems like that's what he's been doing with this thorough research.
Well, I
From
just,
what you're
yeah,
picking up.
I just enjoyed how thorough he was.
Yeah, he's showing the facts.
He wasn't doing a
It says,
superficial,
right.
off the top kind of thing.
If you're gonna have, well, I don't know what the famous novel is. Isn't there one that ends? It's all vanity in the end.
This is interesting statement to reflect. This is interesting statement to reflect on. As President, George Bush sought to establish what he called the ownership society. He was especially fond of the term and in 2002 began using it as a substitute for compassionate conservatism to describe his domestic agenda. Ownership society. He was especially fond of the term and in 2002 began using it as a substitute for compassionate conservatism to describe his domestic agenda. Ownership society.
What is an ownership society? He's encouraging people to own.
They would call it the 1%.
Yes, right.
It's the very rich who are protecting.
But he's
their
covering it
interests.
up with sort of a do-good sounding policy.
Bush said in 2004, after his renomination, that the priority for his administration's second term would be to build an ownership society because ownership brings security and dignity and independence.
So that's innocuous enough to make you think that he wants everybody to join the middle class. A message that's not unlike the way the Democrats want.
We will widen the ownership of homes and businesses, retirement savings, and health insurance, preparing our people for the challenge of life in a free society. By making every citizen an agent of his or her own destiny, we will give our fellow Americans greater freedom from want and fear and make our society more prosperous and just and equal.
That means you have to do what you can with your own money in your own life and don't rely on anyone else to do any kind of group support to build unity together through shared governance, shared welfare, and anything like that.
It's totally against any
And people forget about how bad
sharing, really.
the economy was in the country by the end of Bush's term, second term. It says here, by the end of 2007, the housing market was in a nosedive. The median price had fallen to $217,800, and new construction was down 24.8%. 2.2 million foreclosures had been filed on 1,285,873 residential properties, an increase of 75% over the previous year.
The real sad thing of that is that people shouldn't have been given those loans in the first place. They were rapacious loans. And
They're just rolling the paper over.
Yeah, and they were doomed to failure. And then they penalized the people that were duped into buying them.
In chapter 25, which is called Finis, or Feeney, the author notes that Bush's approval rating in 2008 hovered in the high 20s, dropping to an all-time low of 26.5% in October just before the presidential election. By contrast, Barack Obama's is in the 50s right now, in his last, but about the same time. But
Not
found this really,
smashing legacy.
really fascinating backward look at the legacy.
Well, right, he's had 8 years to look back on it now.
The casualties and cost of the Iraq initiative is estimated in excess of $3 trillion, and has caused the continued instability of the region.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And instability here at home. I mean, all the equipment now is being sold. You look at the police forces in the United States in the bigger cities, they look like military tactical, tactical military units. It's all the trickle-down equipment. Everybody's got these
every city's police department's
Big.
got their own tank.
big-time weapons, yeah.
So that book was Bush by G. Edward Smith, and I think that's a really solid.
What a tome.
What a tome. Gee, we really opened up in a refreshing and engaging, happy theme, didn't we?